Welcome back, weary traveller. Settle in, let your shoulders drop, and let your eyelids grow just a little heavier. Tonight, we're not in a palace or reclining at a senator's banquet. There are no peacock tongues or golden plates. Instead, we're heading to the streets of Rome, where the bread is chewy, the wine is watered down, and the food is, well, edible to say the least. If you enjoy drifting through history while half asleep, press the like button as gently as if you were handling a fig, and subscribe so the next story finds you like a warm loaf of bread waiting at dawn, and ring the bell as if you are calling your loved ones to eat a nice meal that you have just prepared for them with love. By the way, let us here in the archives know where in the world you are watching from. It is always nice to know how far and wide our campaign to bore you to sleep reaches. Tonight from the archives, we shall delve into the hidden world of ancient Roman street food. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let us step into this mouth-watering chapter of history. You wake to the smell of ashes that never really left from yesterday's fires. The air is still grey with night, but the city of Rome is already stretching its limbs, creaking and groaning like some oversized beast that never really sleeps. You hear shutters clattering open, the shuffle of sandals on stone, the first calls of vendors who cannot wait for daylight because stomachs cannot wait for daylight either. Your stomach naturally reminds you that you are not an emperor. No banquets await you, no silver platters piled with roasted peacock tongues, no wine diluted to just the right shade of respectability. No, you are an ordinary Roman, which means your diet will consist of whatever you can scavenge, afford, or politely haggle for on the streets. Welcome to the world of Roman street food. It isn't glamorous, but it is lively. It is noisy, smoky, and sometimes smells like someone set a fish on fire 3 days ago and is still trying to sell it. But this awkward cuisine keeps the city alive. And in a city of perhaps 1 million people, each one hungry, each one stubborn, you quickly learn that food is less about taste and more about survival. You walk down the narrow street. The paving stones are slick with dew and with things you don't want to think about. The walls on either side loom tall, apartment blocks stacked precariously like a child's wooden toys. You catch the scent of baking bread carried by the breeze. It's the same scent that's been wafting through Roman alleys for centuries. Bread is the heartbeat of the city. But man shall not live solely by bread alone. Turn the corner and you find the first stirrings of the tabernae. The food stalls, the humble counters carved into street walls where vendors will sell you hot food for a coin or two. Their counters are inset with large ceramic jars, dolia, where stews and porridge bubble slowly. You know, the kind of thing that makes you question the definition of edible, but fills your belly enough to keep you going until the next shift of hauling bricks, weaving wool, or whatever humble labor keeps your family afloat. The crowd around you grows. Bakers' boys dash through the streets, with baskets balanced on their shoulders, shouting out the freshest loaves. A woman with a scarf tied tightly over her head stirs a pot, her ladle clanging against clay. Somewhere farther down, a man yells about olives, plump, salty, green, and his voice cracks like he's been yelling about olives since childhood. He probably has. If you pause here, you notice the rhythm of life in Rome. The wealthy can afford kitchens in their homes, but most people cannot. Fire is dangerous. Apartments burn too easily. So food is cooked outside, in stalls, in communal ovens, in smoky corners of the city. Street food isn't just a treat, it's a necessity. And so you stand in the misty dawn, part of a living tide of workers, slaves, freedmen, children and travelers, each of you following the smell of cheap food that promises to turn the emptiness in your stomach into something resembling energy. You reach into your pouch, feeling the cool touch of a bronze coin. What will it buy you this morning? Bread dipped in garum, the fermented fish sauce that is to Rome what ketchup is to modern diners. Maybe a handful of nuts, roasted and salted. Or perhaps the cheapest of all, pulse, the humble porridge of grain boiled with water, occasionally brightened with a drizzle of oil or a sprinkling of herbs if the gods are feeling generous. The city awakens around you. You chew slowly, thoughtfully. You try not to think too hard about where the vendor got his water, or whether the bread was kneaded on a surface recently visited by rats. You don't ask, because you don't want to know. In Rome, ignorance is the most important seasoning. But as the sun peeks over the tiled rooftops, one truth becomes clear. Rome does not run on marble or politics or epic poetry. Rome runs on street food, and so do you. You take another bite. Welcome to breakfast. You find yourself drawn toward the ovens. Bread is not optional here. It is the foundation of Roman life, the one food that everyone from slaves to senators consumes. Without bread, riots begin. With bread, at least for a little while, people remain too busy chewing to revolt. The bakery is warm, glowing. Large, round loaves, panis quadratus, are pulled from the oven in clusters, stamped with marks to show which family or household ordered them. The smell alone could convince you that life in Rome isn't so bad if you forget about the open sewers and the occasional plague. You hold a loaf. The crust is dark, hard and ridged, divided into sections so it can be torn apart without too much drama. Inside, the bread is dense and chewy, not soft, not fluffy, not the kind of thing modern bakeries will Instagram with flour-dusted hands and dreamy lighting. No, this bread is workmanlike. It exists to fill bellies, not to charm them. Still, as you tear off a chunk and dip it into a little cup of oil, you realize something. This bread is power. The government knows it too. Grain shipments from Egypt and North Africa are the lifeline of the empire. Without them, the city starves. Distribute free grain to the people, panem et circenses, bread and circuses, and you buy peace. Fail to distribute it and you risk mobs in the forum, the kind that overturns stalls and flings stones at senators. Bread is more than just food. It is politics. It is a social order. It is the quiet threat that underlies every law and every speech. You can almost hear the voice of a weary magistrate. Give them games, give them grain, and perhaps they won't notice we just raised the taxes again. Around you, the street bustles with men and women carrying fresh loaves home. Children bite into their pieces greedily, crumbs tumbling down their tunics. A soldier leans against a wall, tearing his bread with the same focus he gives to his sword. Bakers shout to each other in a haze of smoke and flour, their arms coated white like statues. But not everyone eats the same bread. Wealthier citizens might enjoy finer loaves made from carefully sifted wheat flour, white and smooth. The poor are left with coarser bread, often mixed with barley, millet, or even ground beans and acorns when times are tough. Sometimes you can taste the grit of stone in the flour, the remnants of rough milling. You chew carefully, not just for digestion, but to avoid cracking a tooth. And yet there is comfort here. Bread is a constant, whether dipped in garum, soaked in wine, smeared with cheese, or just chewed dry. It is always available, always necessary. You look around at the people bustling by and realize you are all united by this one act, tearing bread with your hands, filling your mouths, surviving another day. The sun climbs higher, the city roars to life. You feel the energy of thousands of loaves powering thousands of footsteps, thousands of conversations, thousands of arguments in the forum. Rome is an empire of marble, law and ambition. But beneath all that, it is an empire of bread. And so you chew, slowly, sleepily, feeling the heaviness in your stomach and in your eyelids. And you wonder, with just a hint of sarcasm, if maybe all empires could be brought to their knees not by invading armies, but by an empty bakery shelf. You find yourself lured by the smell of something bubbling in a clay pot. It's not bread this time, it's something even more ancient, even more universal, and frankly a little more depressing. Pulse. Pulse is the oatmeal of Rome. Not in flavour, don't be ridiculous, but in spirit. It is what you eat when you want to survive without enjoying yourself too much. Pulse is boiled grain porridge, usually made of emmer wheat, sometimes barley or spelt, simmered until it achieves that delightful grey-brown consistency of wallpaper paste. It is the food of soldiers, of farmers, of anyone too poor or too busy to demand variety. You step closer to the taberna, where a vendor leans lazily against the wall, stirring a dolium with the resigned expression of a man who knows his customers are not here for luxury. They're here because they don't have a choice. A wooden bowl is handed to you. The steam rises in a thin ribbon carrying the faint aroma of grain and smoke. You take a spoonful and, yes, there it is, bland, comfortingly bland. A texture like wet gravel, but somehow soothing in its simplicity. Now, to be fair, Pulse has its upgrades. If you're lucky, or if you have an extra coin, you can have it dressed up with a splash of olive oil, a pinch of herbs, maybe even a drizzle of honey if you're living recklessly. Soldiers often added a bit of cheese or bacon fat to theirs, turning it into a sturdy, salty mass that could sustain long marches. And occasionally wealthy Romans themselves liked to slum it with a fancy version called pulse punica, a porridge livened up with goat cheese, honey and eggs. But let's not fool ourselves. No matter how many extras you add, it's still porridge. You take another bite, trying not to think about how many generations of Romans have eaten this exact same spoonful. Farmers in the fields, legionaries trudging across Gaul, children sitting cross-legged on dusty floors, all spooning up pulse, chewing dutifully and surviving. It is the flavour of endurance, not pleasure. The crowd around you reflects this truth. A young boy eats with both hands, not because it tastes good, but because hunger is louder than taste. An old woman closes her eyes, savouring perhaps the warmth more than the flavour. Two dock workers hunch over their bowls, scratching, probably from hundreds of lice, and muttering complaints about their supervisors with their spoons scraping rhythmically like tools at work. You realize something. Pulse is democracy in a bowl. Rich or poor, hard-working or starving for work, everyone has tasted it. It is the great equalizer of Rome, though, of course, the wealthy usually prefer not to admit it. The porridge thickens as it cools, forming a dense paste that clings stubbornly to your spoon. You sigh, you chew, you swallow. You are full, but not delighted. And maybe that's the point. Because food on the Roman street is rarely about delight. It's about keeping you upright long enough to survive the day, to carry another basket of bricks, to sit through another dull lecture in the forum, to argue once more with your neighbour about whose turn it is to clean the stairwell. Pulse does its job. It keeps Romans alive. And as you set the empty bowl aside, you notice how heavy your limbs feel, how the warmth spreads through your body like a blanket. Porridge may not make you happy, but it makes you sleepy, and perhaps that's just as precious. You walk on with a belly full of paste and a head full of drowsy thoughts. You're starting to see how Romans too might have used food not only to survive, but to lull themselves through the endless noise of the empire. As you wander farther down the street, the smells intensify. Smoke, baking bread, frying oil, and then, yes, that smell. Sharp, pungent, aggressive. It grabs your nostrils, shakes them around, and demands your attention. You've found garum, or rather, garum has found you. Garum is fermented fish sauce. To modern ears, this may not sound terrible. After all, certain parts of Asia have their own versions. But Rome's garum was more than a condiment. It was an empire-wide obsession. Imagine barrels of fish guts left to ferment under the hot Mediterranean sun until they break down into a salty, savory liquid. That liquid is strained and bottled. It is poured over everything: bread, beans, meat, porridge, even fruit. Romans would probably have poured garum on cake if cake had existed in its modern form. The vendor you approach is scooping a ladle of it over a piece of bread, the golden brown sauce dripping slowly down the crust. He looks proud. You try to look enthusiastic. The smell is memorable. It is ocean mixed with vinegar, mixed with the faint suggestion of death. And yet, when you bite in, you understand the appeal. It is salty, rich, and oddly addictive. It turns bland bread into something almost exciting. It lifts the flat porridge into something resembling flavor. Garum comes in many grades. The finest, liquamen, was made from carefully chosen fish, fermented in clean jars and sold at high prices to wealthy households. The cheapest varieties, murky, thick, filled with questionable bits, were hawked on the streets for a coin or two. You can probably guess which one you're eating right now. Still, garum has power. It is the taste of Rome. Amphorae filled with the sauce are shipped across the empire from Spain to Syria. In Pompeii, archaeologists found whole shops dedicated to its production. In Gaul, local versions cropped up adapted to regional fish. It was global trade in liquid form, long before global trade had a name. You lick your fingers. The taste lingers, sharp and insistent. Around you, others do the same. A soldier laughs as he drenches his bread, unbothered by the dripping mess. A group of children beg for extra drops, their eyes lighting up as if this were candy. An old man shakes his head, muttering about how in his youth garum was stronger, saltier, better, the eternal complaint of every generation. You find yourself both amused and horrified. Amused that something so simple could dominate a culture. Horrified that you might actually be starting to enjoy it. Because here's the thing, garum works. It gives the illusion of abundance, of richness, of variety. Pour it over beans, and suddenly beans feel less like poverty. Drizzle it on greens, and suddenly you're eating like a senator. If you squint. It's the trick of the Roman street. Make the simple taste luxurious, or at least distract the tongue long enough for the belly to be satisfied. You wander on, the smell following you, clinging to your clothes, your hair, your very soul. You can leave Rome, but can you ever truly leave garum? Really? Probably not. You sigh, content and slightly nauseated. You are part of the empire now. Not because you follow its laws, not because you worship its gods, but because you have tasted its source. And as the sun climbs toward noon, you think to yourself, if ever Rome falls, perhaps it will not be the barbarians who bring it down, but the fish that finally revolt. You find your hand reaching for something simple, something less aggressive than fermented fish juice. Thankfully, Rome provides. On nearly every corner, a vendor has a basket of olives or a tray of roasted nuts. They're the perfect snack. Portable, bite-sized, and mercifully resistant to spoilage. You can carry them in your pouch as you wander the forum or chew them slowly while waiting in line for the public latrines. They require no explanation, no elaborate cooking, no complicated sauce, just salt, sunlight, and a little patience. You stop at a stall where an old man, hunched but cheerful, is scooping black olives from a clay jar. They glisten in the morning light, slick with oil. He offers them in a small cone of parchment, folded just enough to keep the brine from dripping on your tunic. You taste one, and the salt hits immediately, sharp enough to wake even the sleepiest senator. The olive is a quiet powerhouse of Roman life. Grown across the Mediterranean, pressed into oil, preserved in jars. It is one of the empire's greatest agricultural triumphs. Oil fuels lamps, perfumes the skin, fills sauces, anoints the gods. But here on the street the olive is simply food, a worker's quick burst of salt and fat before returning to labor. Nearby, another vendor tends a small brazier, roasting nuts in their shells. Almonds, walnuts and hazelnuts, depending on the season and the trade routes. The shells crackle in the heat, releasing a warm, toasty aroma that cuts through the sharper smells of garum and sewage. He hands you a handful wrapped in a scrap of cloth. You crack one open with your teeth, and the taste is earthy, faintly sweet and simple. Around you others snack in the same way. Children chase each other, stuffing olives into their mouths and daring each other to spit the pits farther down the street. A soldier flicks a walnut shell into the gutter, adjusting his belt as he chews. A young woman carries a small pouch of almonds, nibbling them one by one as though each nut were a tiny luxury. You realize something as you chew. In a city of excess, where emperors drown themselves in oysters and poets complain about indigestion, these little snacks are what keep most people going. They are affordable, accessible, and endlessly practical. And maybe, just maybe, they are a glimpse of joy. Not the overwhelming joy of a banquet, not the dizzying joy of too much wine, but the small, steady joy of salt on your tongue, warmth in your hand, and the knowledge that for the next hour or two, hunger will leave you in peace. You finish your handful, dust your fingers on your tunic, and smile faintly. Not every Roman pleasure needs to be loud. Some are quiet, pocket-sized, and best enjoyed one pit at a time. You wander deeper into the market streets, and your nose detects something richer. Not fish sauce this time, thank the gods, but dairy, sharp, creamy, and slightly sour. It's cheese. Yes, cheese is here. Rome has no shortage of it. Goat cheese, sheep cheese, cow cheese, though goats and sheep are far more common. Hard cheeses, soft cheeses, and crumbly cheeses are stored in baskets. Even pungent ones are wrapped in leaves. Cheese is everywhere, and everyone eats it. A vendor calls to you, waving a wedge of something pale and crumbly. He cuts off a slice with a thin knife and hands it over. You taste it. It's salty, firm, and slightly grainy on your tongue. This is no creamy brie or soft mozzarella. Roman cheese is rugged, practical, made to travel across dusty roads and last through long days in the sun. Soldiers carry it in their rations. Farmers spread it on bread. Children gnaw at it between chores. The vendor points to his jars of ricotta-like soft cheese, thick and white, spooned out onto bread for those who can pay a bit more. Beside it, wheels of aged pecorino rest in rows, their rinds hard and dark. There is cheese for every budget and every appetite. You buy a small wedge and walk on, nibbling as you go. The flavor lingers, tangy and filling. It is, in its own way, a luxury, richer than porridge, more indulgent than plain bread. And yet it is not out of reach for the common man. A coin or two buys enough to keep you satisfied. Around you, cheese becomes the glue of social life. Two men share a hunk as they argue about gladiator matches. A child grins with his cheeks puffed full of soft cheese and bread, his mother scolding him gently even as she licks a bit off her own fingers. A group of labourers sit on a step, passing around a wheel, cutting slices with their knives and laughing between bites. Cheese also pairs well with nearly everything else you've seen today. Crumble it into pulls, and suddenly the porridge tastes almost decadent. Pair it with olives, and you've got a quick lunch worthy of a poet's picnic. Spread it on bread, drizzle with honey, and, well, you're nearly dining like the gods. And Romans did, in fact, imagine their gods ate cheese. Rustic feasts in honor of the old Italian deities often included it, especially in the countryside. Cheese was not just nourishment. It was tradition, a link to pastoral life, a reminder that Rome, for all its marble and armies, was still built on farms, fields, and flocks. You lick your fingers, finish your wedge, and sigh. Cheese is comforting. Cheese is continuity. Cheese is the little reminder that sometimes Rome does get it right. The streets are loud with vendors shouting about their olives and their garum, but your sweet tooth whispers louder. And in Rome, sweetness is a treasure. Sugar, of course, is centuries away, but honey, honey, is the golden miracle that makes life tolerable. You follow the sticky scent to a stall where honeycombs glisten in the morning sun, their waxy hexagons oozing liquid gold. The vendor slices a piece and lets it drip into a little clay bowl where it pools slowly, thick as syrup. You dip a chunk of bread into it. The taste floods your tongue, rich, floral, almost dizzying in its intensity. For a moment, you forget the dust, the smoke, the arguments about grain prices. For a moment, you are simply human, and humans love sweetness. Honey is Rome's dessert aisle. Bakers drizzle it on pastries, cooks stir it into sauces, healers prescribe it for ailments, lovers gift it as tokens. It clings to everything, both in kitchens and in metaphors. To call someone's words honeyed is to accuse them of charm, of manipulation, of delicious deceit. You lick your fingers and wonder how many Roman senators have tried to win debates with honeyed bribes. Probably all of them. But honey is not alone. Fruit, too, crowds the stalls. Fresh figs, their skins splitting under the heat, purple and bursting with sweetness. Dates imported from the east, chewy and rich, sometimes stuffed with nuts for those who can afford the extra indulgence. Grapes piled high in baskets, juicy enough to stain your hands. Apples, pomegranates, even berries depending on the season. You bite into a fig. The seeds crunch softly. The flesh dissolves. It is both ordinary and luxurious, a reminder that nature occasionally does the work of cooks for them. Children run past, clutching sticky handfuls of raisins. A man bites into a pomegranate, red juice dripping down his beard like a battle wound. A woman sells small tarts filled with nuts and honey, and the line for them stretches halfway down the street. Of course, not everyone approves of indulgence. The Stoics frown at excess sweetness, warning that too much honey leads to weakness of body and character. You glance at your honey-dripping bread and think, weakness has never tasted so good. Sweet treats in Rome are not daily fare. They are for festivals, for special occasions, for moments when life feels worth celebrating. But on the street, even the poor might afford a single fig, a handful of raisins, and a drizzle of honey. Enough to remind them that joy, however brief, is still possible. You chew slowly, letting the sweetness linger. The city around you blurs slightly, softened by sugar's haze. You think about how this empire runs on bread and oil and fish sauce, but survives on tiny bursts of pleasure like this. Moments of sweetness that make the hard edges of life just a little softer. Your eyelids grow heavy. Honey does that. Too much and you're not just full, you're dreamily full, the kind of fullness that makes you want to lie in the shade of a fig tree and sleep through the afternoon. You smile faintly. Rome is noisy, brutal, exhausting, but Rome also knows how to be sweet. Sweetness fades and the air grows smoky again. This time, the smell is unmistakable. Meat sizzling over an open flame. You follow it like a moth to fire, weaving through the crowd until you reach a makeshift grill set up on the corner. Here, a vendor turns skewers of meat, small chunks, not grand roasts, beef, pork, chicken, goat, whatever could be cut into pieces and sold cheaply enough. The skewers hiss as fat drips into the coals, sending up sparks. The smoke clings to your hair, your clothes, and to your imagination. You buy one, hold it carefully, bite in. The meat is chewy, charred on the edges, salted just enough to bring out its flavor. It is not a feast, but it is fire and protein and satisfaction on a stick. In Rome, meat is not everyday food for the poor. It is expensive, often reserved for special days or for those who can afford to flaunt it. But on the streets, scraps are salvaged, seasoned, grilled, and sold in small amounts. Street grills are the democratic loophole of Roman carnivory. You may not have a boar roasting in your villa, but you can have 3 bites of pork on a skewer while standing on a dusty corner. Around you, the grill is a stage of appetite. Dock workers line up, their coins clinking as they jostle for skewers. Children whine until their mothers tear off a bite for them. A soldier wolfs down his portion in 3 gulps, as though expecting to march off any second. Some stalls offer sausages, fat and sizzling, bursting open with juice that spatters onto the coals. Others sell slices of cured meat, salty and thin, tucked into bread. Occasionally you find fish grilled whole, tiny river fish, eaten bones and all. The smoke from these stalls merges with the city's haze, creating a permanent perfume of meat, charcoal and sweat. You take another bite and reflect on Rome's strange relationship with meat. Gladiators, surprisingly, were nicknamed barley men, their diets heavy on grains rather than meat. The wealthy, meanwhile, staged feasts where entire animals were roasted or stuffed with smaller animals in grotesque displays of abundance. But here in the street, meat is stripped of its spectacle. It is reduced to what it truly is, a snack, quick fuel for the body, no more and no less. You chew slowly, watching the grease drip down your hand. There is something hypnotic about the grill, the way flames lick at the food, the way the vendor flips skewers with practiced ease, the way hunger makes strangers into temporary companions around the fire. The smell follows you as you leave, embedded in your tunic, mingling with garum, olives and cheese. You are becoming a walking menu, a scented catalogue of Roman survival. And perhaps that is the point. Rome is not fed by banquets. Rome is fed by corners like this, by smoke and skewers, by small bites carried in tired hands. You lick your fingers, sigh contentedly, and let your thoughts drift. Because grilled meat, like life, is fleeting, and the best way to honor it is to savor each bite before it disappears into smoke. The sun tilts higher, and your throat feels dry. Dust from the streets clings to your tongue, and the salt of olives, garum, and cheese demands relief. And here, too, Rome obliges. The drink of choice, wine, always wine, but rarely the kind you're imagining. Roman wine is not the elegant bottled vintage you might picture in a modern vineyard's brochure. It is sharp, often sour, sometimes sweetened, and almost always diluted with water. To drink it straight, undiluted, is the mark of a barbarian, a scandalous lack of manners that would make your neighbors look at you as though you'd just tried to wrestle a senator's toga off in public. You find a popina, a small tavern spilling laughter and voices into the street. Clay cups clatter against wooden tables. Jugs of wine are lined up on the counter, each one a different shade of red or gold, each one promising more forgetfulness than flavor. You hand over a coin and receive a cup of thin, watered wine. It tastes faintly of grapes, faintly of smoke, faintly of the jar it was stored in. But it is wet, it is cool, and it eases the dust from your throat. You sip slowly, watching the scene unfold. Men lean across tables, arguing about races in the circus. A group of women laugh as they dip bread into their cups, soaking the crust until it softens. A soldier slumps against the wall, already half asleep after his 3rd jug. Wine is everywhere in Rome, cheap and plentiful. It fills the gaps in diets, masks the taste of stale water, and provides the city with its most reliable form of both comfort and chaos. It is spiced with herbs, sweetened with honey, sometimes cut with seawater to stretch supplies. Amphorae filled with wine travel across the Mediterranean, feeding taverns, festivals, and households alike. For wine is not just pleasure, it is identity. To drink it diluted is to be civilized, Roman, respectable. To drink it neat is to declare yourself a wild man, an outsider, a creature unfit for the order of the city. The cup, then, is more than a vessel. It is a quiet declaration of belonging. You sip again, and your head grows light. The noise around you softens into a background hum. The city's sharp edges blur. You feel at last the strange peace that wine provides, not the roaring intoxication of a feast, but the gentle loosening of burdens, the slow melting of worries. As you wander back into the streets, cup empty, you see the rhythm repeat. Workers pausing for a sip before returning to labour. Vendors refilling their own jugs between customers. Children sneaking drops from neglected cups. Grimacing at the sour taste but proud of the daring. Rome runs on bread, yes, but Rome drifts, dreams, and sometimes forgets itself on wine. And you too are drifting now. One more sip, and the city begins to feel almost kind. The day stretches long, and slowly the chaos winds down. The shouting of vendors grows softer, fires burn low in their braziers. The smell of bread and meat fades, leaving behind the faint tang of smoke and garbage. The city exhales. You walk through the streets as night settles. Oil lamps flicker on doorways, casting pools of light onto stone. The food stalls, once crowded and loud, stand quieter now. Pots are scraped nearly empty. Counters are wiped down with rags that will never truly be clean. Children doze against their mothers' shoulders, bellies full. Dogs sniff through discarded scraps, tails wagging at luck's generosity. The rhythm of the city changes. Daytime hunger gives way to nighttime exhaustion. Workers trudge home, clutching leftover bread or half-empty jugs of wine. Lovers linger at tavern doors, their laughter spilling into the cool air. A baker yawns as he stokes the oven once more, preparing for another dawn of loaves. You pause, leaning against a wall, feeling the weight of the day's food in your belly. Bread, porridge, garum, olives, cheese, honey, meat, wine. It all mixes into a strange tapestry of flavors and fatigue. You are not feasting, you are not starving. You are simply surviving as Rome itself survives. One bite, one coin, one noisy market day at a time. The stalls themselves seem almost human in the dark. Their counters slump with wear, their jars chipped from years of service. They are not glamorous, not monumental. They will never be carved in marble or celebrated in epic verse. But they are Rome. Without them, the city does not eat. Without them, the empire collapses under its own hunger. And so, as you watch the last vendor shutter his stall, you feel a quiet respect, not for emperors or generals, not for senators or poets, but for the men and women who stood behind counters, stirring porridge, roasting nuts, pouring wine, handing over pieces of survival, one coin at a time. The city hums low, the stars flicker faintly above, and your own eyelids grow heavy. You realize that Roman street food was never about indulgence. It was about endurance. It was about finding small comforts in a world of endless labor and noise. It was about the bite of bread dipped in garum, the crunch of an olive pit between your teeth, the sweetness of honey clinging to your fingers. And as sleep begins to tug at you, you imagine the city itself drifting off too. Rome, full of smoke and salt and laughter, tucking itself into the night, ready to wake again tomorrow with the smell of baking bread and the rumble of hungry stomachs. You close your eyes. You are full. You are tired. And you are, in your own small way, Roman. And there you have it. You've eaten your way through the back streets of Rome, chewy bread, pulls, smoky sausages, wine, sticky honey cakes, and enough garum to keep your neighbors at arm's length. If you liked this sleepy stroll, let us know in the comments. Hit that like button, subscribe, and tap the bell like a Roman coin against a counter. That way, the next journey, whether to a Viking hearth or a medieval market, finds you right where you're meant to be. Cozy, calm, and a little hungry. For now your belly is full, your eyes are heavy, and the streets of Rome fade into dreams. Good night, traveler. We cannot wait to see you again in the archive.